We need to talk about 2026, because when we look at America's finances for that year, we start seeing some absolutely mind-blowing numbers. We're talking numbers so huge they're hard to even wrap your head around. So in this explainer, we're going to break it all down. What does the $39 trillion debt actually mean for the country, and more importantly, for you?
Okay, first up, this number, $39 trillion. That is the projected U.S. national debt for 2026. Just to put that into perspective for a second, if you spent $1 million every single day, it would take you over 100,000 years to get through $39 trillion. It's a lot, and it's the total amount the U.S. government owes.
And then there's this one, $1 trillion. That's how much more debt the government is expected to pile on in the 2026 fiscal year alone. That's the overspending for just 12 months.
So yeah, these figures are pretty shocking, but they can also feel kind of abstract, right? So what's the big deal? What are the real-world consequences? How does this actually trickle down and affect the economy and, well, your life? Let's get into it.
First things first. Before we can go any further, we have to get two crucial terms straight, because they get mixed up all the time. Debt and deficit. They are not the same thing, and knowing the difference is totally key to understanding the full picture.
This slide lays it out perfectly. Think of the deficit as a one-year snapshot. It's just how much the government overspent in a single year. The debt, on the other hand, is the running total. It's the sum of all those yearly deficits all piled on top of each other.
So let's just hammer this home. Every year, the government brings in revenue, mostly from taxes, and it spends money on things like Social Security, the military, healthcare, you name it. When that spending is more than the revenue in a single year, boom, that shortfall is the deficit.
And now for the debt. The Peterson Foundation has this great analogy for it. Just think of the national debt like the total balance on your credit card. Every single annual deficit is like a new charge you put on the card. The national debt? That's the grand total you owe after years and years of spending more than you brought in.
So that leads to the next question. How did that credit card balance get so ridiculously high? I mean, the U.S. has had debt pretty much since it was founded, but the path we're on right now is what has everybody so concerned. Let's do a quick history lesson.
In the past, big spikes in U.S. debt usually happened during huge crises, things like major wars or deep recessions. But here's the thing. After the crisis was over, the debt would usually start to shrink compared to the size of the economy. What's so different now is that the debt is just steadily climbing, even when there isn't a massive single crisis happening.
And you can see it right here on this timeline. Look at those spikes. The Civil War, World War I, the Great Depression. The biggest peak of all was during World War II, when the debt was actually bigger than the entire U.S. economy. After that, it went down for decades. But now, look where we're headed. We're on track to blow past even that historic high.
So unlike those past events, the problem today is what economists call a structural mismatch. And all that really means is that there's a permanent gap baked into the system between what the government spends and what it takes in. A lot of this is driven by long-term trends, like an aging population, which means more spending on Social Security and Medicare, and of course, just rising healthcare costs in general.
Okay, so we know the terms and we've seen the history, but what does it all really mean? What are the actual real-world consequences of being this deep in the red? Let's talk about the ripple effects.
Wow. This quote from a CNBC analysis really paints a picture, doesn't it? It just gives you a sense of how serious the underlying health issues are for the U.S. fiscal system. It's pretty blunt.
The Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, or CBO, lays out some really key consequences. One of the biggest? Higher borrowing costs, which can literally slow down the whole economy. It also means we have way less flexibility to deal with the next crisis, whatever that might be. A pandemic, a natural disaster, you name it. And here are the CBO's actual projections for 2026. They're forecasting, pretty modest economic growth and inflation that's still a little hotter than the Fed would like. But the number to really keep your eye on here is that 10-year Treasury rate. That's a huge benchmark for borrowing costs across the entire economy, everything from mortgages to car loans. At a projected 3.9%, it shows the pressure from all this government borrowing. And get this is a really crucial point. The cost of just paying the interest on the debt is ballooning into one of the biggest items in the entire federal budget. In fact, it's projected that soon we'll be spending more on interest payments than we spend on our entire national defense. Think about that. That's a huge shift in our country's priorities, driven entirely by past borrowing. Okay, so this all begs a pretty big question. If the US owes so much money, who do we actually owe it to? Is it all owned by foreign countries, like you hear sometimes? Let's take a look at the data.
Now, this might actually surprise you. The vast majority of U.S. debt is not held by foreign countries, not even close. In fact, around 70% of it is held right here, domestically. That means the U.S. government owes most of its debt to its own citizens and its own institutions.
And when we break it down, you can see the biggest single holder of U.S. debt is actually the Federal Reserve. Then you have things like mutual funds and pension funds, your retirement money. Then, when you look at foreign holders, Japan and the UK are at the top, and China, despite all the headlines you read, holds only about 2% of the total public debt.
So all of this data, all of these trends, they all lead to one giant question for the future. Is the path we're on right now even sustainable?
Well, the consensus from official sources like the CBO is pretty clear. Our federal debt is on track to grow faster than our entire economy. And that, right there, is pretty much the definition of an unsustainable path. It's just like that credit card analogy. It's having a balance that's growing way faster than your paycheck. Eventually, something's got to give.
And that really brings us to the ultimate trade-off, doesn't it? Because every dollar we spend just on interest payments is a dollar we can't spend on literally anything else. And as that slice of the pie gets bigger and bigger, it forces us to make some incredibly tough choices. So the real question we're left with is, what will we have to give up? Is it going to be investments in science and tech, our infrastructure, education? That is the true cost of the debt we're piling up today.